Hi, I'm J. Philip Perna. I'm the superintendent for Montauk School. That's the first initial J, Philip, Philip, Perna, Perna. First meeting was Friday, September 10th, 1926. It's when they created the district out of East Hampton. The building was built in 1927. It's actually the third school building. When the district was created, it was run by the district superintendent from BOCES 1 out of West Hampton Beach. The teaching principal was Mrs. Matthews. I was hired by Bob Fisher in 73. The first edition was 1955. Then we added on again in 1965. Then we put relocatable classrooms in 1973. And we did a final edition in 2000. I had Marge Belfontaine, Hank Zabrowski, Brad Dickinson, who still teaches here, Nancy Doherty, Peggy Joyce, Trevor Kelsaw, John Tagliavia, Mr. DeMario. Even though we seem to have the same number of kids, we've added on several times, we don't seem to have enough room, and we seem to have more teachers than ever before. But that goes because of the different programs that are now required. We have 5 special ed teachers and 2 ESL, English as a Second Language teachers. So that's already 9 people, or whatever it is, 7 people.
My name is Richard F. as in Fox White Jr. W-H-I-T-E. I was born in Montauk, actually in Southampton Hospital on February 21st, 1941. And I have lived in Montauk ever since. Growing up in Montauk, my first recollection, of course, would be in I would say 1944. I mean, I distinctly remembered my mother talking about D-Day and her brother being involved in the invasion. So my first recollection is Montauk in the 40s, mid-40s. And in those days, Montauk had Army, Navy, Coast Guard, Signal Corps. And it was basically a military, it wasn't a tourist town. There were people who did come out and visit, but it was nothing like, absolutely nothing like today. I think there were something like 500 and some residents. There were probably several hundred more military people. When I went to school, in those days, the school did not have a kindergarten. It started at first grade. And there were 2 grades in each room. And so my first recollection of school was first and second grade. And that was Mrs. Joyce. And then third and fourth grade was in one room with Mrs. Dilden. And then fifth and sixth was in another room. And I had 2 teachers there, Mrs. Barnes and Mrs. Rudishan. And then 7th and 8th was Mr. Ross and then Mr. Morales. But anyway, there were only 58 kids in the whole school with 8 grades. And the school physically is about 1/3, was 1/3 of what it is now, size-wise. Where the library is now was the gym. And the gym had a stage on it, and we did plays and all the things you do today. We had a sports program. We had no uniforms. We used to play touch football against Amagansett and Springs and Tuckahoe. I don't know why Tuckahoe, but we did. And the other part of Montauk was after the war and tourists started coming back, on Labor Day, my father had a drugstore, and it was next to the post office, and that was next to the liquor store. And across the street was Shagwan Tavern and Sears Market and a barber shop. And where Chronic's Tackle Shop was, that was Dave Edwards' photo shop. And that was basically Montauk. There were no other buildings. And the tourists came on 4th of July and they left on Memorial Day, on the Labor Day. And believe me, when they left, they left. They didn't come back for Columbus Day or Thanksgiving or Christmas. That was it. And then slowly as time goes by, you had the Korean War, and I have very much memories of the anti-aircraft units coming into town late at night in convoys and coming out to Camp Hero and practicing out here. And they would fire at targets that flew by, and we would be in the classrooms. And since our 5th and 6th, 7th and 8th all faced the ocean, you could see the flak when the ammo exploded. You could see the flak there. And then in the 50s, the first couple of motels were built. Prior to that, we had the Manor, which opened right when school got out and closed Labor Day. That was it. Labor Day night, it was empty. And we had the Manor and the Dude Ranch and Bill's Inn, which is now E&E, and several guest houses, and that was about it. And then through the 50s, it just got bigger and bigger. As far as the fishing fleet, right after the war, a man by the name of Gene Goebel bought what was then the torpedo testing base, which today is Rough Rider Landing. And there they had a huge hangar and several buildings where they tested torpedoes, and a huge dock. And that dock is where all the charter boats and the open boats went out of. And a friend of mine and I, Bill Steck, used to go down there when the boats came in on the weekend. We would do it. And for a nickel a fish, I would scrape the scales, gut them and head them, and put them in a little bag that I would have had. And I got a nickel a fish, and Bill was a lot more proficient at it, and he would fillet fish, and he got a dime a fish. And I remember getting enough money to go to the, what they had was a large cafeteria, I guess you'd call it, and I could buy a hamburger for 25 cents, so I only needed 5 nickels, and I was in good shape. Montauk was not very built up, so there were vast areas of open space. And as I got older, say around 13, 14, I would do duck hunting in the various ponds, little puddle ponds. And there was no problem with that. There was nobody around, so you just went ahead and did it. I used to love to fish in Fort Pond, and later on surf casting. My family lived what's now White's Liquor Store. Well, we lived upstairs. We had the whole upstairs. And where the liquor store is now was a drugstore. And as I said before, next to it, where Kai Kai Sandal is, was the post office. And where Montauk Printing is was the liquor store. So we had the whole upstairs. Now the upstairs had been, when it was first built in 1925, it had been a movie theater and a hardware store and a drugstore. And so the upstairs, there was a projection room. There were no more cameras, they took them out. And there were the remains of an office building. And where Billy Walsh's survey office was my bedroom. And then there's 2 apartments that are up there now. One that we lived in. The other one was just rooms, and I had a room just for my electric trains. And my mother had a room where she could dry the clothes after she took them out of we didn't have a dryer, we just had a washing machine. And she would hang them inside the house. And across the street, as I said, was Sears Market. Well, my favorite thing about Montauk now is the natural beauty that's here. I mean, fortunately, people before us saw this, and 72% of what you know of Montauk is in open space. It's either state park, county park, town preserve, and so the majority of the land is protected, and so this natural beauty is preserved. However, what I grew up with was totally different vegetation-wise. There were no trees. Vast areas, thousands of acres of land were burnt every year. Every spring we burnt them. And that was apparently something that the Indians had done before we got here. Because if you realize that Montauk was nothing more than a grazing area for East Hampton, actually from Patchogue east, there were thousands of head of cattle and sheep and goats and horses and oxen and so forth that grazed Montauk. So if you look at the old photographs, you don't see any trees. It's just barren. And so that's what I grew up with. I was always jealous of East Hampton when I'd go in there to see all these tall trees. We were just windswept. One of the fondest memories I have is being involved in the last cattle drive. The cattle were brought into Montauk by boxcar, cattle car. And there would be several hundred head of cows, beef cows. And they would be let out of the boxcar in the afternoon, and they would be penned up down at the railroad station. And then the next morning, we would go out to the ranch about 3 o'clock in the morning, saddle up, ride to town on horseback. And then just at daybreak, we would open the fences and let the cattle come out. And they would go down Edgemere. And then what is now Lyons Field, they cut across there because there was nothing there. There was nothing there. There was no post office, no motels, no houses, nothing, just grass. And they cut across that corner. But then they would go up the highway. And the problem with that was once we were on the highway, we had the highway all the way to the ranch. So if you wanted to get around us, you had to go down Flamingo Road and then go around Westlake and go that way. Otherwise, there we were, several hundred head of cattle and guys on horseback, and we were just like you see in the movies. We drove the cattle out to the ranch, and that's where they would be for the summer. And then while they were out there in the summer, we would go out and we would round them up and geld them, and also we would tick spray them and so forth, and brand them. So I had an experience of being out west while I was out east.
My name is Judy Ceslow, C-E-S-L-O-W. That is a Lithuanian name, but it's not mine. My maiden name was Mead, M-E-A-D, and that's Irish. When I was a child, they were fabulous because we were at the hills camping out for the entire summer. I never had a pair of shoes on except on Sunday morning to go to church. And then when we got back to Queens in September, my feet hurt when I put the shoes on them. My poor old feet. Being free, especially in Hither Hills. We had the ocean right there and square dancing every Friday night and packs of kids running wild. No discipline. Oh yeah, Navy Road right over there to the beach. It's filled with strangers now in the summertime. Favorite places, yeah. And the lighthouse, I used to like to go up to the lighthouse, but now they charge so much money to park, I don't go anymore. at the Montauk Diner where the Point Restaurant and Bar is now. And I was a car hop out in the back in the gravel wearing red pedal pushers. I didn't last at that too very long because I dropped a few trays full of food.